Yes, sir.
How frustrating is it for you to be a Democrat in Jackson? You've got a captive audience here. We love you and your bipartisan approach. But how do you get through these
Listen,
things?
for those of you who know me, I mean, I'm truly not that partisan in my personal life. Most of my friends are Republicans. I was with several of them last night who came into town, and they think of me as their little Democrat buddy. My mother is a Republican. She says she prays for me. I say, I know, Mom, you pray for me to change parties, but I'm not going to do it. I am who I am, and there are reasons why I chose to be a Democrat, and there are reasons why I remain a Democrat. But I don't think in a state like Mississippi we have time for partisanship. There are too many big issues to try to get bogged down in whose team you're on. So I'm not changing parties. I'm not trying to, evangelize to anybody else to change parties, but we all have to work together. And my frustration has been not because my party's in the minority. And by the way, folks, my colleagues chose me to be the leader in the House, so I'm the minority leader. It's a difficult job. I'll be very honest with you, but not just because we're in the minority, but because the Democrats in the Mississippi legislature don't want to be led. That's one thing about Democrats. It's tough to get us to fall in line. The Republicans, I admire them because the speaker can snap and they all fall in line. They vote just the way he tells them to vote. And so while I couldn't do that, that's not my personality, I do admire their regimen. But the frustrating thing is that there is has been a refusal to work across the aisle on things like infrastructure. The sole reason why we didn't have a bill last year is because the House Republican caucus couldn't get the votes in its own membership to bring it out. And therefore they said, we're not going to work with Democrats. We're not even going to talk to Democrats about getting enough votes to make it work. So we had nothing. I think that's bad for business. And that part is terribly frustrating to me. Now, I will say this. I don't know what happened over the off-season, but I went back to the session this year. Before I got there, the speaker called me and he said, hey, I want you to come by my office and I want to visit with you. I said, okay, great. And his right-hand man is a guy named Nathan Wells, who taxpayers pay his salary, about $200,000, and he works the floor for legislation, and then he works campaigns to try to beat people like me. So it's difficult to be real friendly with these folks, but he called me too and said, let's sit down, let's have a cup of coffee. Lynn Fitch, the treasurer, Republican treasurer, has reached out to me and said, I want to support your equity pay bill. So I don't know what's happening, but this year I feel like they're extending their hands across the aisle. And I'm not going to be resentful of that. I'm not going to worry about how it's been the last 5 years. I'm going to say thank you, let's work together. Because if we work together, then we can do some good things. That's the way I feel about it.
Representative, one of the key problems in this Hancock community, and I'm not sure if there's any real talk among the legislature, but is the consolidation of schools. And that's within the county, sometimes within the school districts. I know Hancock County's had a pretty big issue about that. Can you mind talking about that?
No, I don't mind talking about it. It's been a thorny issue, and we've dealt with it now for 4 or 5 years. We've consolidated 1 or 2 a year. And these are schools, and look, let me say this. Frankly, some schools probably should be consolidated. But your school is kind of like your family or like your local hospital. I mean, people defend it. If they tried to consolidate my school and my folks down here didn't want the schools consolidated, then I'd be fighting against it too. But what I would do is come back down here and I'd have a meeting like this and I'd say, what do y'all want to do with our schools? I would defer to the people who know better than I do about it. But most times when there's an attempt to consolidate schools, the school is failing, which means it's receiving a D or an F grade, that they have serious infrastructure problems like buildings and grounds and buses. They've had problems with their leadership, and each one is still a fight. There have been a couple that have been agreed upon, but most every one of them was a floor fight. And and if the local folks tell me they don't want their school consolidated, then I'm likely to support them on that. And I have. But when locals say we need to consolidate, I've supported that as well. But some school districts have 500 students. And if you got another neighboring district that has 500 students, and they both have principals and both have superintendents and all the administrative costs, then perhaps they should consolidate. There are good reasons for saving costs. But school districts, like everything else, become little fiefdoms, and people protect those fiefdoms. So you got that dynamic going on as well. But you'll see, I think, probably a couple more consolidations this year. Yes, sir.
I've got one point I'd like to make, and
Sure.
correct me if I'm wrong. Now, it's my understanding that in the state of Mississippi, that campaign financing money can, after you leave office, you can take that money with you. And to me, that seems like a vehicle for corruption. Does any other state have that particular provision that you know of?
I can't tell you whether any other state has it, but if there are other states, there are only a few. We're one of the few states, and maybe the only state, that allows people to do that. And it's something that needs to be changed. And, you know, and we just passed a bill in the House Wednesday that will change that.
Well, that's great, because to me, it's a vehicle that when people get up in office and they're gonna get reelected and so on and so forth, that people can buy influence and do it within the law by doing that.
Well, it's just not right. I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test. Let me give you a brief history on it, I'll come back
What's
to you.
the bill
Ron.
name or number or author?
The one that just passed?
Yeah.
It was, I think Philip Gunn and Bill Denny authored the bill, 797?
797, I believe.
Or 497.
Yeah.
I don't know the bill
I'll go
numbers,
with
I'm
the
sorry.
author.
But let me tell you, it's a little unusual the way this happened, and this will be a good vignette for what goes on in the legislature. Last year, the bill had been vetted, gone completely through the process, Senate and House, and when there is disagreement between the two versions of the bill, then you have a conference committee that works out the differences. 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate, they meet, they hammer out the differences, then they generate what's called a conference report, and they bring it to both ends, and it has to pass the Senate and the House, and then it goes to the governor, and the governor can sign it or veto it. That's the way the process works. This bill that came before us last year had not only campaign finance reform, but it had some election reforms in it that the Secretary of State, Delbert Hosemann, was in favor of. Bill Denny, the chair of elections, offered it. We thought there was good support for it. We got in a debate on the floor of the House in the last 2 days of the session, and people started asking questions, and it was the Republicans, it was the Speaker's lieutenants who killed the bill. Now, I don't know why they killed it, but some of them just want to be able to do what they want to do with their money, that they think is their money in their campaign chests, so to speak. So I think the Speaker was stung a little bit by that, surprised by that. He took a beating in the press. The Clarion Ledger did a series, like a 2-week series on it, and I think it hurt him. So this year, the Speaker authored a bill just on the campaign finance aspect, not the election reform stuff. And normally a bill gets filed and it gets referred to a committee that has something to do with that issue. That is the type of bill that should go through elections. And that's where it went last year. Bill Denny's the chair of elections. The bill didn't go to elections, it was sent to Rules, which is a committee that is controlled very tightly by the Speaker. Bill Denny didn't even know the bill was going there. I talked to him about it, and he wasn't happy with it. It wasn't his bill, and the process was not usual, let's put it that way. So it's also not usual to get a big bill like that in the first week of the legislative session. But it came out of Rules. 2 hours later, it's on the floor of the House, and we're debating it, all of which is very unusual. But the biggest problem with that is they thwarted the process, and the bill doesn't get discussed and vetted, and you don't have hearings on it. I talked to Delbert Hosemann. He said, I don't know anything about the bill. I mean, you want the Secretary of State, who's in charge of elections and campaign reporting, to know something about the bill that you're filing to, reform campaign finance. So one of my biggest complaints with this current administration is the way they run things through just because they have the power to do it without allowing for a hearing and a process for input and vetting, because you don't get the best legislation when you just hurry things through. This bill has problems. There was one provision in it that I caught while I was reading it, while the debate was going on, that it would allow somebody like the governor, who's probably, or the lieutenant governor, sitting on $4 or $5 million in cash, we understand. Let's say he didn't want to run for governor, and he just wanted to become the bank of Tate Reeves. He could start making loans from his campaign finance account, and he could charge interest. There's nothing that would prohibit him from doing that. So it wasn't thought through very carefully. And when I ask these questions, they tell me, all right, you're right, Representative Barry, we're going to work on this in the process, which means they're going to try to fix it when it goes to the Senate, or they'll fix it in conference, or maybe they won't fix it at all, and they'll come back and say, we liked it the way it was. But that's the problem with the process when you have complete authoritarian control, and we have that now. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, when one fellow, a gentleman like Joe Max Higgins brings 6,000 jobs, is instrumental bringing 6,000 jobs to Mississippi, I mean, did you have anything to do with that, or are you looking at that to see?
I'd love to take credit for that, but Joe Max Higgins has done a great job up in the Columbus Golden Triangle area, and they had a sort of a confluence of things going on that we don't really have everywhere else in the state. First of all, they have superior schools, they have superior infrastructure, they got the 10-time waterway, they got really good highway systems up there, they have 2 universities, they got the state and the W that are research universities, and they had a local group of officials who were not scared at all to offer incentives to people to come in there. And so they have bought a lot of those jobs. Now, are they turning over dollars in the economy and helping the area boom? I think they probably are. But Joe Max had the support of his local folks and was able to offer a lot of incentives to a lot of those companies. And that's what MDA tries to do in other places as well. Y'all, let me give you another vignette. This guy is dead now, so I don't think he would mind me sharing this. But there was a guy named John Carenti who built a big steel mill up in that area. And Joe Max Higgins brought John Carenti there. He was one of the first big businesses that Joe Max landed. And what they did was they take scrap metal, they put it in what amounts to like a big wok, and when they get enough in there, they close the lid on it and they stick an electrode in there and flip a switch, and this power melts it, and then they melt it off into ingots or whatever, and they sell that steel. And it's a great business model and created a lot of jobs up there. Well, he wanted to build another one of those in Hancock County, Mississippi.